The air in Grandmaster Anton Kovac's study was a still life of death, smelling of old leather, dust, and the faint, sweetish odor of decay that Inspector Kale had learned to associate with a body left for days. Kovac was slumped in his high-backed chair, head lolled back as if admiring the cobwebbed ceiling, his eyes clouded over. Before him, on a beautiful rosewood board, a chess game was frozen in time. Kale's team moved around him with the hushed efficiency of morticians, but he stood transfixed by the board. It was a mausoleum of ambition, each piece a polished sentinel. He hadn't thought of chess, truly thought of it, in 20 years. The sight of it was a key turning in a long rusted lock, and the memories that tumbled out were not pleasant. "Massive stroke, seems like," Dr. Lem said, snapping off his gloves. "78, high-stress lifestyle. It's not exactly a surprise." Kale didn't answer. His eyes, once trained to see patterns where others saw chaos, were tracing the lines of attack. The position was a known beast, the Vladimir Enigma, a famously unsolvable checkmate in 3 puzzle. Black was in a zugzwang, every move a step deeper into the grave. It was the kind of problem Kovac, a legend of the game, would relish. But something was wrong, a single sickening dissonance. A white pawn sat on c5. In every published iteration of the Enigma Kale had ever seen, that pawn was on c4. The c5 variation was a theoretical dead end, a line so obscure it was dismissed as a novice's error. It had only ever been formally published once, in the Budapest Chess Review, circa 1978. He remembered because he'd devoured that journal as a boy, his mind a sponge for such esoterica. He remembered the authors, too, Anton Kovac and his then-partner, a fiery theorist named Alexei Volkov. Their collaboration had ended in a bitter, public schism that defined both their careers. Volkov had vanished from the elite circuit decades ago. And now, this misplaced pawn, this ghost from a shared, acrimonious past. "Lem," Kale said, his voice rough, "run a full tox panel, everything, especially for nerve agents." Lem blanked. "A nerve agent? Inspector, he's 78. "Just do it." Kale's own flaw, the one that had shattered his own promising future in chess, was his memory. Not a failure of it, but a tyranny. It was eidetic, perfect, a relentless archive of every game, every move, every mistake. The pressure of that perfect recall had frozen him during his final, decisive championship match. He joked, seeing 1,000 branching possibilities and choosing none. He had traded the silent war of the board for the louder, messier one on the streets. But the ghost of his failure had never left him. It lived in the slight tremor in his hands, in the migraines that bloomed behind his eyes when the archive was forced open. The lab report came back 48 hours later. A rare, synthetic compound, untraceable, that mimicked the effects of a catastrophic stroke. It was administered via a pinprick, likely from a signet ring. Murder. Kale's external goal was clear: find the killer. His internal need, the one that clawed at him, was to prove that his cursed memory, the thing that broke him, was not a weakness, but a weapon. The confrontation began not with a suspect, but with a library. He submerged himself in the past, in the yellowed pages of chess journals. The c5 variation was Volkov's folly. Kovac had publicly dismantled it in a series of articles, humiliating his former friend. This murder wasn't just a killing, it was a statement, a taunt. The board was Volkov's arrogant signature. "You died looking at my greatest, discredited idea. I beat you, finally." Finding Alexei Volkov was like trying to pin down smoke. He lived off the grid, a ghost in the modern world. Kale's break came from a customs manifest, a shipment of rare, untreated rosewood from Brazil, sent to a P.O. box in the dilapidated port district. The killer was arrogant, but he was also an artist. He wouldn't have used just any board. He would have used one he made himself. The warehouse was a cathedral of shadows, smelling of salt, rot, and freshly cut wood. At its heart, under a single hanging bulb, a man was bent over a lathe, the screech of tool on wood filling the space. He was older, his hair a wild white mane, but his shoulders were broad, and his hands, covered in a fine dust, were steady. "Alexei Volkov," Kale said, his voice echoing. The man shut off the lathe. The silence was sudden and profound. He turned, and his eyes were the color of flint. Inspector Kale, the prodigy who forgot how to win. I wondered if they would send a real player, or just a thug.
"The game is over, Volkov. The C5 pawn. Only you would be that proud of a failure." Volkov smiled, a thin, cruel line. "Failure? It was genius. Kovac stole the credit for our work, then spent his life burying my contributions. He turned the world against me. That position was our first collaboration. I thought it fitting it would be our last." He gestured to a finished board, identical to the one in Kovac's study. He sat there, smug as ever, explaining why my variation was illogical. He didn't even see the pin in my hand. This was Kael's dark night of the soul. He was alone, facing a brilliant, ruthless killer who saw him not as a policeman, but as a failed chess player. The old fear, the paralysis of infinite choice, threatened to seize him. He could feel the weight of every game he'd ever lost pressing down. "You made one mistake," Kael said, forcing his voice to stay level, his mind to focus on a single winning line. "You relied on the past. You assumed no one would remember that journal. You assumed no one would see your signature. And you assume you can prove it," Volkov countered, picking up a heavy woodworking chisel. "Your memory is your only weapon, Inspector. And in this place, with no witnesses, what good is it?" The climax was not a physical fight, but a continuation of the game. Kael's mind, once his prison, became the battlefield. He didn't see a chisel, he saw a queen moving to attack. He didn't see a man, he saw the embodiment of the antagonism that had haunted his own life, the fear of being rendered obsolete, of being proven a failure. "I don't need to prove it to you," Kael said, his voice dropping to a whisper. He took a step forward, his own body the only piece he had left to move. "I know. That's enough. You didn't just kill a man, Volkov. You defiled the one thing you both loved. You're not a grandmaster. You're just a murderer who plays with dolls." He saw the insult land, saw the cool intellect in Volkov's eyes shatter into raw human fury. With a snarl, Volkov lunged, the chisel gleaming. But Kael was ready. He had anticipated the move. He sidestepped, using Volkov's momentum to slam him against the lathe. The struggle was brief, violent, and ended with the click of handcuffs. The resolution was earned. Kael had not run from his memory. He had weaponized it. He had not been paralyzed by the past. He had used it to navigate the present. He confronted his flaw, and, in that final, decisive moment, he had chosen the right move. In the denouement, back in his sparse apartment, Kael took out his own old chess set. The pieces felt familiar in his hands, but the weight of them was different. He set up the Vladimir Enigma, with the pawn on c5. He stared at it for a long time, not with the anxiety of a prodigy afraid to fail, but with the calm analysis of a man who had finally won his most important game. The memory was no longer a curse, but a library, a resource, not a warden. He reached out and gently tipped over the Black King. It was just a piece of wood, and he was, finally, free.